The new alien roommate. Jake never liked surprises. He was a quiet human technician working on a deep space station called Delta 9. His life was simple: fix broken systems, eat alone, and sleep early. He liked it that way. But today, something was different. Jake walked into his room after a long day of work. The lights were dim, and the air felt strange. There was a new bed in the corner, and a small black suitcase on top of it. "What the?" he muttered. Just then, the door opened behind him. He turned around and saw her. She was tall and thin, with glowing green eyes and long silver hair that floated like it was underwater. Her skin was pale blue, and her clothes were smooth and shiny, like liquid metal. "I am Nira," she said softly. "I am your new roommate." Jake blinked. Roommate. He hadn't asked for one. He liked living alone. But the station often changed rules without warning. "Okay. Welcome, I guess," he said awkwardly. Nira gave a small nod and moved to her bed without another word. Over the next few days, Jake tried to stay out of her way. She was quiet, polite, and never caused problems. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was in soft, short sentences. She spent most of her time reading data files or staring at the stars through the window. But there was one strange thing Jake noticed. She always locked the bathroom. Not just for showers, every time she went in. And she stayed inside for a long time. Sometimes 20 minutes. Sometimes a full hour. Jake didn't want to be rude, so he never asked. But it was weird. One night, Jake came back from a late shift. It was almost midnight. The hallway was empty and silent. He opened the room door quietly. Nira wasn't there. The bathroom door was slightly open, and the light was off. He stepped inside. The air smelled sweet, like flowers and something strange, something sharp. He turned on the light and froze. In the corner of the sink, near the trash bin, were small, shiny stones. About 6 of them. They glowed slightly in the light. He picked one up. It was warm, smooth, red like a ruby, but brighter. Jake frowned. No way. He took all 6 stones and placed them in a small metal box. He didn't know what they were, but they didn't look like trash. They looked expensive. The next morning, Nira acted normal, calm, silent. She didn't mention anything. Jake wanted to ask her about the stones, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he took the box to the station's research lab during his lunch break. His friend Mick, a lab tech, agreed to scan them. After a few minutes, Mick called out, "Jake, where did you get these?" Jake shrugged. "Why? What are they?" Mick's eyes were wide. "These aren't synthetic. These are real, high-density crystalline gems. Rare, very rare, worth thousands, maybe millions." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "You sure?" "Totally. These things only grow in one system, and even there, it's rare. This is high-grade stuff." Jake slowly closed the box. His fingers trembled slightly. That night, Jake watched Nira closely. She seemed a little sad. Her eyes were darker than usual, and she sat curled up near the window. He noticed something else. Her hands were glowing softly, the same red color as the stones. He didn't ask anything. But deep inside, a question started growing in his mind. Where were these gems coming from? And why did she leave them behind, like trash? 1 hour later, Nira went to the bathroom again. She stayed inside for 45 minutes. When she came out, Jake pretended to be asleep. But after she lay down, he quietly got up and checked the bathroom again. In the same spot, near the trash bin, were 3 more glowing stones. He picked them up slowly. They were still warm. Jake stared at the gems in his hand, and a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just strange. This was something big, and he was now a part of it, whether he liked it or not. The shocking discovery. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the 3 glowing stones in his hand. The red light from the gems softly lit up the room. Nira was sleeping, breathing slowly. She looked peaceful, but something about her wasn't right. These came from her, Jake whispered to himself. I know it. He remembered what Mick said at the lab. High-value gems, maybe worth millions. Rare, dangerous. Jake was no scientist, but even he understood what that meant. If someone else found out what Nira was dropping in the bathroom, she could be in serious trouble. And maybe he could be too. The next morning, Jake carried the new gems to the lab again. This time, he didn't wait for Mick. He used a scanner himself, keeping things quiet. The results made his stomach twist. Organic crystalline formation. Energy-based structure. Not machine-made. Not natural earth gemstone. He stared at the screen. These aren't just valuable, he muttered. They're alive, or at least made from something alive. Jake glanced around the lab. No one was watching. He copied the scanned data onto a private drive and quickly left the room. His heart was beating fast. His hands were sweaty. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was scared. Back in his room, Nira was standing near the window again. Her silver hair floated gently, as if touched by invisible wind. She turned slowly as Jake entered. You scanned them, she said softly. Jake froze. What? The stones. You took them, she said, her voice calm, not angry. Jake swallowed. I didn't know what they were. I know, Nira whispered. She looked down. Her fingers were glowing again, this time blue. Jake stepped forward, carefully. Nira, what are they? She looked up. Her green eyes were full of sadness. They are me. Jake blinked. What do you mean? The stones. They come from my body. But not like food or waste, she said. They come from my feelings. Jake's eyes widened. You mean emotions? Nira nodded. When I feel too much, the energy inside me changes. My body turns it into something solid. A crystal. A gem. It depends on the emotion. Jake looked at his metal box full of red stones. So, red means what? Fear, pain, Nira said quietly. Jake felt like the air had been sucked from the room. These are from when you're hurting. Nira nodded again. For a moment, Jake didn't know what to say. He thought about all the times she'd stayed silent. The way she sat alone. The way her hands glowed after crying. All those beautiful glowing gems. They were signs of her suffering. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked. Because, she said, stepping back. Humans are no different. Others from your species would sell me if they knew. Jake frowned. I'm not like that. Nira gave a small smile. I know. That's why I told you. Jake sat down slowly. His head was spinning. So your people, do they know about this ability? She nodded, her smile fading. They used me. For years. They locked me in a lab. Made me feel pain. Took the gems. Sold them. I was nothing more than a machine to them. Jake's stomach twisted again. That's horrible. One day, I escaped, she said. I ran. Hid on a cargo ship. It brought me here. Jake was silent for a long time. Then he asked, Are they looking for you? Nira didn't answer, but her hands were glowing red again. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Again. He sat in bed, thinking about everything she said. A girl who turns pain into gems. A runaway being hunted. A living, breathing treasure. And a prisoner in her own skin. If the wrong people found her. Suddenly, the alarm on his desk beeped. Incoming ship. Unknown ID. No registered flight plan. Jake stared at the screen. A cold chill ran down his spine. Was it just a random visitor? Or was it something else? He quickly stood up and turned to Nira. She was already awake, and her eyes were full of fear. "They'd found me," she whispered. Jake looked at the blinking alert again, then back at Nira. "I won't let them take you," he said. But deep down he knew this was just the beginning. Secrets of her species. The ship hovered silently outside the space station, like a dark shadow. Jake watched the screen in the control room. The ship had no name, no ID, no reason to be there. But Jake knew. Deep inside, he knew exactly why it had come. "They're here for her," he whispered. He ran back to his room. Nira was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Her long silver hair covered half her face. She didn't look up when he entered. "You were right," Jake said. "They found you." Nira nodded slowly. "Who are they?" Jake asked. "What do they want?" Nira lifted her head. Her eyes were dim now, tired, not glowing. "They are from my homeworld," she said. "From the royal labs of Otheri Prime. They are not soldiers. They are collectors." Jake frowned. "Collectors. They collect people like me," she said. "People who can make gems from their bodies. People who were born cursed." Jake sat down across from her. "Tell me everything." Nira looked at him for a long time. Then finally, she began. "A long time ago," she said softly, "my kind were strong and proud. We were not like this. We didn't create crystals from emotions. But something changed. There was a disease, a strange energy sickness that came from a dying star. It touched our DNA, mutated it. Some of us began to change." Jake listened, completely focused. "Our bodies reacted to emotion. When we cried, we left behind stones. When we loved, gold. When we feared, rubies. Our sadness became treasure. At first our people didn't understand. They feared us. But then, they found value in the gems." Jake's heart sank. He could already guess what happened next. "They captured us," Nira continued. "Locked us in white rooms. Made us feel pain on purpose. Showed us sad memories. Gave us injections to make fear grow inside us. And when the gems appeared, they smiled." Jake felt sick. "That's inhuman." "To them, it was business," she said. "One gem could feed a family for a year. A full box could buy a ship. They called us emotids, emotion stones. They turned our pain into currency." Jake clenched his fists. "How did you escape?" Nira looked away. Her voice became a whisper. "I didn't want to live anymore. One night, I cried so much that I filled the room with black stones, grief crystals. They shattered the glass of my cage. I ran. I didn't look back." She paused. Her hands were glowing again, but this time the light was a dull purple. Jake noticed. "Purple? What does that mean?" Nira hesitated. "Shame." He moved closer. "You don't have to feel that. What they did to you wasn't your fault." "I'm not normal, Jake," she said. "I can never live a quiet life. My body is always reacting. I can't hide forever." Jake looked at her, then at the box of stones he had hidden earlier. Each one was a piece of her story, each one a moment of pain. "You don't have to hide," he said firmly. "We'll find another way." But just then, the station's speakers crackled. "Room 36. Respond. Visitors request entry. Purpose. Retrieval of escaped subject." Jake and Nira froze. The voice was cold, not human. The message was clear. They were coming for her. Jake stood up fast. "We need a plan. We can't let them take you." Nira looked up, eyes wide. "They will scan the room. They will know I'm here. Then we'll make it look like you left," Jake said, already grabbing tools from his shelf. "We'll fake a signal trail. I'll read the door sensors, confuse the scanners. We'll make them think you already escaped again." "You'd do that for me?" she asked. Jake stopped and looked at her. "Of course I would. You trusted me with your truth. I'm not going to let them lock you up again. Over the next 30 minutes, Jake worked like never before. He rewired the panel near the door, tapped into the station's system, and created a false signal, one that made it look like Nira had taken an escape pod 2 hours earlier. At the same time, Nira hid inside a hollow supply bin, deep in the storage bay. It was tight, cold, and dark, but it was safe. For now. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead as he sealed the bin. "Stay here. I'll handle the rest." Nira nodded, her glowing hand reaching out. She placed a tiny green gem into his hand. "What's this?" he asked. "Hope," she whispered. "For luck." Jake nodded and closed the bin. A few minutes later, the door to their room opened. 3 tall alien figures stepped in. Their skin was gray-blue, eyes dark and empty. They wore smooth suits and carried strange devices. "She's not here," Jake said calmly. They scanned the room. One of them checked the bathroom. Another walked to the window. "No signs," the leader said, "but we sense her aura. She was here recently." Jake shrugged. "She's gone. I don't know where." The aliens stared at him. For a long, silent moment, Jake thought they would tear the room apart. Then, without a word, they turned and left. Jake waited until they were gone. Then he ran to the storage bay and opened the bin. Nira was still there, shivering slightly. "You did it," she said. Jake smiled and held up the green gem. "No," he said. "We did it." But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. They would come back. And next time, they'd be ready for war. The hunter ship arrives. The stars outside the station had started to shift. Jake noticed it first while staring out the observation deck window. One group of stars near the horizon blinked, then vanished, then blinked again. He zoomed in using the control panel. A ship. No, not just a ship. A hunter-class vessel. It was huge and shaped like a dark crescent moon, almost blending into the space behind it. No lights, no signals, and no ID tag. But Jake knew exactly who it belonged to. "They're back," he whispered. He tapped his comms. "Nira, hide now." Inside the maintenance tunnels, Nira heard his voice echo through the metal walls. She was already on the move, her steps silent, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She had learned to live like a shadow. Every part of her body was trained to run, hide, and survive. But now something inside her had changed. She didn't want to run anymore. Meanwhile, Jake rushed to the command center. He scanned the station's security logs. The hunter ship was powering up a docking arm. They were coming in. No warning, no request, just action. Jake cursed under his breath. The fake escape logs he had planted weren't enough. The hunters knew she was still on board. He pulled up internal sensors. They were already inside the docking tunnel. 3 life forms. Heavy armor. One had a heat signature the size of a small engine. "These aren't collectors," Jake muttered. "These are hunters." 30 minutes later, the docking bay doors opened. Out stepped 3 figures. They were tall, armored, and terrifying. Thick black suits wrapped around their bodies like snakes. Their helmets had no faces, only dark glass. They moved like machines, slow, heavy, unstoppable. One of them raised a device and sniffed the air, literally sniffed, as if tracking prey. "She is near," a robotic voice said. They spread out. Jake watched from a hidden camera. He'd seen bounty hunters before, but these were different. These ones weren't after money. They were after control. Nira wasn't just rare to them. She was property, a living resource they couldn't afford to lose. Inside the tunnels, Nira stopped. She could feel it in her bones, the low hum of the hunter ship. Her kind had once been forced to live inside ships like that, locked in cages, forced to cry for profit. She closed her eyes. Her body started to glow softly, a mix of red and gold, pain and strength. She was tired of being hunted. She was ready to fight. Jake had one last plan. He raced to the power station and pulled open a control panel. Wires sparked as he rewired the power grid. His idea was crazy, risky. He was going to shut down half the station, cut the lights, stop the airflow in unused sectors, confuse the sensors, and maybe give Nira a chance to escape or fight back. He looked at the green gem she gave him, the one that stood for hope. He held it tight and pulled the switch. Darkness fell across half the station. Doors locked. Lights flickered, and in the shadows, Nira moved like lightning. She appeared behind one of the hunters and touched his helmet with glowing fingers. The armor hissed. Sparks flew. The hunter screamed. The other two turned, weapons drawn. Too late. Nira was already gone. She had learned from pain. But now she had learned from Jake too. How to be brave. Jake met her in the old cargo hold. He found her standing alone, surrounded by the unconscious hunters. One was trapped inside a magnetic field, another tied up with wire. Only one remained, the largest one, still standing, still fighting. Jake stepped between Nira and the last hunter. "You're not taking her," he said. The hunter raised a massive weapon. "She belongs to us." "No," Jake said. "She belongs to herself." Before the hunter could fire, Nira raised both hands. Her entire body glowed bright white, brighter than any time before. And from the glow, a crystal formed in midair. Pure white. The light struck the hunter like a wave. He fell backward, frozen, not dead, but in a sleep so deep he would not wake for days. When it was over, Nira collapsed. Jake caught her. Her body was warm and light, like holding a flame made of glass. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," Jake said softly. "You saved yourself." Later, as they floated near the viewing deck, the hunter ship slowly drifted away, pulled back by auto-recall commands. Without its team, it could do nothing. The station returned to normal. But Jake and Nira both knew nothing would ever be normal again. "I didn't know I could do that," Nira said, staring at her hands. "You've never had a reason to try," Jake replied. She turned to him. "What do we do now?" Jake smiled. "Now we stop running. Now we find out how far your power really goes." "And if others come?" she asked. Jake looked out the window. "Then we fight. Together." Escape plan. The station felt calm again. Too calm. After the hunter ship left, Jake and Nira had 2 full days of quiet. No alarms, no messages, no strange signals. The wounded bounty hunters had been picked up by automated rescue drones. The station returned to routine. But Jake wasn't fooled. He knew this peace wouldn't last. "You need to leave," Jake said quietly. He and Nira were sitting in the back of the station's cargo bay, near the emergency launch tubes. Nira sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes focused on the small white gem glowing in her palm. "This station isn't safe anymore," Jake continued. "You were brave. You fought them off, but they'll send more. Stronger ones. Maybe even a whole army." Nira didn't look up. "And where will I go? There's nowhere safe for me." Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small datapad. He placed it in her hands. "There is a place," he said. "A hidden colony on the edge of the nebula. It's run by free people. Outcasts, survivors, people who protect their own. I have a friend there. He owes me a favor." Nira studied the map on the screen. "It's far. I'll help you get there," Jake said. "I have a plan." Jake's plan was bold, risky, maybe even crazy. But it was their best chance. He would fake an emergency systems test to shut down the station's sensors. At the same time, Nira would sneak into one of the unused cargo launch tubes. Once inside, Jake would trigger a hidden launch. Silent. No broadcast. No trace. The escape pod would drift into deep space for an hour, then activate its engine and jump toward the hidden colony. Simple on paper, But nothing about this situation was simple. The night of the escape, everything was ready. Jake sent the test signal, shutting down 40% of the station's scanners for 10 minutes. He guided Nira through the maintenance tunnels, watching her move like a shadow. At the launch bay, the pod door opened with a soft hiss. Inside was a small cockpit, a bed, and enough supplies for 3 weeks. "You sure you'll be okay alone?" Jake asked. Nira nodded. "I've been alone most of my life." Jake smiled sadly. "Not anymore. I'll find you." She stepped inside the pod, but then turned back and held out her hand. In her palm was a tiny blue gem. It glowed like water under moonlight. Jake frowned. "What's this one mean?" "Trust," Nira said. "For you." Jake took the gem carefully. "Then I'll keep it safe." The door began to close. But then, everything changed. The lights flickered red. An alarm screamed. Jake's comm crackled. "Unauthorized life form detected in launch bay. Lockdown initiated." "No," Jake shouted. He ran to the control panel, typing fast, trying to override the command. Nira's escape pod was sealed shut, not launched, locked. Worse, someone was coming. From the shadows of the upper deck, a tall figure stepped out. Not armored, not a hunter, but human. He wore a black coat, military style, with a silver badge on his shoulder. "Station Commander Rin," Jake said in shock. "You're not supposed to be here. You were off-duty planetside." Rin smiled coldly. "I came back early. You triggered every silent alarm in this place." His eyes flicked to the locked pod. "She's inside, isn't she?" Jake moved in front of the panel. "You don't understand. She's not a threat." "She's a weapon," Rin said. "And weapons belong in vaults." Jake stepped forward. "She's not a weapon. She's a person." Rin pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed it. The escape pod's control lights turned red. "Self-destruct armed." "You won't send her anywhere," Rin said. "She's going back into containment." Suddenly, a loud boom echoed through the launch bay. The floor shook. Smoke poured from the corner of the room. Nira had blown the pod hatch open from the inside, using her own crystal energy. She stepped out, glowing bright purple and gold. Her eyes burned with light. Rin stumbled back. "Impossible." Nira raised her hand. "I will not go back." Rin reached for a weapon, but Jake was faster. He tackled him, knocking the device from his hand. "Go," Jake shouted. Now, Nira didn't hesitate. She ran across the platform, jumped into the emergency chute, and let herself fall down into the cargo launcher. Jake hit the final button. Launch sequence active. The floor opened. The pod fired silently into the blackness of space. No signal, no trail, just a whisper in the stars. She was gone. Free. Jake turned to face Rin, breathing hard. "She's not your lab rat anymore," he said. Rin growled. "You'll pay for this." Jake looked him in the eye. "Maybe, but at least I did something right." Security bots rushed in seconds later. Rin was arrested for activating illegal lockdown protocols and threatening station safety. Jake wasn't charged, but he was watched now, closely. Later, in his room, Jake sat at the window, holding the blue gem. He looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Nira was flying toward her new life. And maybe, toward hope. The final showdown. It had been 6 days since the launch. 6 days since Nira escaped into deep space. And 6 days since Jake lost all contact with her. He sat alone in the dark corner of Delta 9's lower deck, staring at the blue gem she had given him. It still glowed faintly, like a heartbeat, a sign she was alive, but distant. And now, something had changed. The glow was fading. Jake didn't know why, but he could feel it deep inside. Nira was in danger again. Earlier that morning, a quiet message came through an old channel, a hidden signal, masked behind normal traffic. Jake decoded it slowly. It was a distress call. From her. The message was short, broken by static. Trap. Not safe. Taken. Location. Mining base. Asteroid 7Z. Help. Jake stood frozen, the pad shaking in his hands. They got her, he whispered. She never made it to the colony. Somewhere along her journey, someone must have intercepted her pod. Maybe the hunters tracked her signature, or maybe the station had a traitor. Either way, she was captured. Again. But this time, Jake wasn't waiting. He was going in. He stole a shuttle the next night. Quiet, fast, off-grid. He loaded only what he needed. Food, tools, a weapon, and one tiny glowing gem. The last message from Mira. The route to Asteroid 7Z was long and rough. A mining zone that had been abandoned years ago. But rumors said someone had reactivated it. Not for mining. For extraction. Of something far more valuable than metal. Jake landed on the dark side of the asteroid, avoiding the active scanners. He suited up and climbed through a forgotten air duct that led into the underground base. What he found made his blood boil. Long glass tubes filled the dark hallway. Inside each tube floated a person. Some were alien, some human. Most looked weak, half asleep, pale, and glowing. In the center of the room was a large machine. It hummed with deep power. Each tube connected to it. And inside a chamber at the very core was Nira. Her body floated weightless, like a sleeping statue. Wires ran from her back, her chest, her arms, and around her floated hundreds of crystals, red, purple, gold, and clear, turning slowly, shining under cold light. Jake's heart sank. They were draining her, feeding off her emotions, her memories, her pain, and turning it into wealth. He stepped forward, rage burning inside. "I'm getting you out," he whispered. But then, footsteps. Guards. 2 large aliens in black armor entered the room. Jake ducked behind a control panel. His pulse pounded in his ears. He couldn't fight them head-on. He needed a distraction. Jake pulled out one of the old tools from his belt, a power disruptor. If he overloaded the crystal containers, the energy could create a short burst, enough to knock out the lights and give him 10 seconds. He set the charge. It buzzed, clicked, and boom. A flash of light. The guards fell with a grunt. Jake ran to the chamber, smashed the glass with his tool, and pulled Nira free. Her body was limp, barely breathing. "No," Jake said, voice shaking. "You're not done yet. Not like this." She opened her eyes weakly. "Jake." "I'm here," he said, lifting her gently. "I've got you." Alarms screamed across the base. Emergency lights flashed red. Jake carried Nira through the hall, dodging beams and flying sparks. The base was collapsing. The short burst had triggered a chain reaction in the power core. They reached the shuttle just as the ceiling began to cave in. Jake strapped her in, fingers flying over the controls. Come on, come on." The engines roared. The asteroid cracked. And the shuttle blasted free, just in time. Behind them, the base exploded into a wave of fire and crystal dust. Inside the shuttle, Nira was awake now, weak but alive. She looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. "You came for me." "Of course I did," Jake said softly. "You're not alone anymore." "I thought they broke me," she whispered. "I gave them everything." Jake pulled the tiny blue gem from his pocket. "No," he said. "You still had this. You still had hope." She smiled through the tears. And a soft green light formed in her palm. She handed him a new gem. "Peace," she said, "for the first time in my life." They sat in silence as the stars passed by outside the window. Together. No more running. No more cages. Only one final journey left, to freedom. Freedom and farewell. The stars never looked brighter. Jake sat by the shuttle's window, watching them drift slowly past. It had been 2 days since the rescue. 2 days since the mining base exploded behind them in a wave of fire and crystal dust. And now, finally, they were almost there. The hidden colony, the one Jake had told Nira about, was just ahead. A safe place. A true home. Nira lay resting in the medical bed behind him. Her body still hadn't fully recovered. She was stronger than before, yes. But deep down, Jake could tell. She was tired. Not just physically, but emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that lives in the soul. Yet she still smiled when she looked at him. A real smile. No fear. No sadness. Just peace. As the ship neared the colony, Jake opened a private channel and called ahead. The voice that answered was rough but kind. "Jake, it's been years. Thought you were dead." "I almost was," Jake replied. "Listen, I'm bringing someone with me. She's special." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's not cargo. She's not tech. She's a person. A survivor. She's been through things no one should go through. She just wants to live." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "We'll take care of her. You have my word." Jake smiled. It was finally happening. The colony was hidden deep in a dust cloud between two shattered moons. It didn't appear on any maps. You had to know it was there to find it. As the shuttle passed through the storm, the hidden city came into view, built inside the bones of an ancient ship, now overgrown with alien plants and glowing energy. Warm lights lined the walls. People of all kinds moved through the walkways. Humans, aliens, hybrids. No one stared. No one asked questions. It was a place built on second chances. They landed quietly in Dock 9. Jake helped Nira to her feet. Her legs were still weak, but she stood with pride. No longer a prisoner. No longer running. As they stepped off the ship, a group of quiet figures came forward. Doctors, caretakers, and a tall woman with silver hair and dark brown eyes. The leader. She looked at Nira and gave a slow nod. "No scans. No questions," she said softly. "You are safe here." Nira's shoulders dropped slightly, the first true sign of relief. Jake saw her eyes begin to glow softly, a pale green light. He didn't need to ask what it meant. She was happy. That night, they sat on a rooftop garden, overlooking the colony. Warm air drifted through the leaves. Distant music played from below. It almost felt like Earth, or at least what Earth used to be. Jake held the collection of gems Nira had given him. Red, gold, purple, blue, white, and now green. Each one told a piece of her journey. Each one was a memory. Painful, powerful, and real. "You don't need to keep those," Nira said, sitting beside him. "I know," Jake replied, "but I want to." She smiled. "Do you know what they become if left together for long enough?" He shook his head. "They merge," she said. "They form something new, something not based on fear or pain." Jake looked down at the gems in his hand. They were already beginning to shimmer, ever so slightly, blending at the edges. "What will it be?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "No one's ever been allowed to live long enough to find out." The next morning, Jake woke up to find a note on the table. It was written in Nira's careful handwriting. "Jake, this place is home. I feel that now. But you have a bigger purpose. You gave me freedom. You showed me trust. But I can't ask you to stop your life for me. I know you'll come back. I believe that. Until then, I'll wait under this sky. Nira." Beside the note was a new crystal, one Jake had never seen before. It glowed softly, a swirl of colors all blending together. Not one emotion, but many. He held it gently, and for the first time in a long while, he felt whole. Jake left the colony the next day, not because he wanted to, but because Nira was right. He had more to do, more people to help, more cages to break open. But this time, he wasn't alone. Everywhere he went, He carried the gem she gave him, and in quiet moments, when he held it close, he could feel her presence. Calm, warm, steady, a reminder of what they fought for. A symbol of what comes after pain. Hope.